son's wife told me to pack my things on a Tuesday, not a Sunday, not after some long, painful conversation at the kitchen table. A Tuesday while I was still in my bathrobe, while my coffee was still hot. I remember looking at the mug in my hand. It had a little painted cardinal on it, something I'd bought at a church rummage sale years ago, and thinking, this is still warm. This is still warm. And she is telling me I have 2 weeks. I was 69 years old. My husband Frank had been gone for 4 months. I should back up because the Tuesday makes more sense if you understand what came before it. Frank and I were married for 41 years. We met at a hardware store in Dayton, Ohio. He was buying a replacement hinge for a kitchen cabinet. I was buying caulk for the bathroom. And we somehow ended up talking in the parking lot for 45 minutes about nothing in particular. That was 1981. We married the following spring. We weren't wealthy people. Frank worked for a sheet metal fabrication company for most of his career. I worked part-time as a bookkeeper for a dental practice until the kids were older, then full-time until I was 62 and my knees started complaining about the commute. We paid off our house. We had a savings account. We took one vacation a year, always somewhere we could drive to, always with a cooler full of sandwiches in the back seat. We had 2 children. Our daughter Faye lives in Tucson. She has 3 kids of her own, a job that keeps her running, and a husband who is kind and a little quiet. We talk every Sunday. She came to Ohio when Frank got sick, and she came back again for the funeral, and she cried in a way that broke something open in me. Our son Kevin lives 12 minutes from where Frank and I bought our house. He'd lived in the same county his entire life, which I used to think was a blessing. A son close by, someone to call when the gutters needed cleaning. He married Brenda 8 years ago. Brenda is organized and efficient, and she decorates for every season, which I respect, even if it always felt like living inside a catalog. She had opinions about everything, about how children should be raised, about what constituted a reasonable expense, about which side of the family took precedence at holidays. She had opinions about me too, though she kept those ones mostly quiet, until she didn't. When Frank got his diagnosis, a fast-moving thing, the kind that doesn't give you time to argue with it, Kevin suggested I sell our house and move in with them. Frank was still alive then. Frank was sitting right there at the kitchen table when Kevin said it, and Frank looked at me across the table with an expression that said, "You don't have to." I know I didn't have to. But the house was big and I was scared, and Kevin seemed sincere, so I said yes. We sold the house in September. Frank died in November. I moved into Kevin and Brenda's guest room with 2 suitcases, a box of books, and the cardinal mug. I thought I would stay there while I figured out next steps. I thought next steps would mean something manageable, something I could plan for. I was wrong about what came next, but not in the way I expected. The first month was fine, in the careful, polite way that fine usually means something else. Brenda had set up the guest room neatly. There were folded towels and a small lamp, and a little dish for my rings on the nightstand. I tried to be unobtrusive. I cooked dinner twice a week. I watched the grandchildren, Kevin's 2 boys, 8 and 11, when Brenda had errands. I did my own laundry, and I did not touch anything in the kitchen that wasn't mine. I was trying to take up as little space as possible. I think that's the part I find hardest to say out loud even now. I am a 69-year-old woman who raised 2 children and kept a household running for 4 decades, and I was tiptoeing around my own son's kitchen trying not to be too much. By February, the temperature had changed. Not outside, inside. Brenda stopped making eye contact at dinner. Kevin started coming home later. The boys were fine, bless them, still climbing on me for hugs, still asking me to watch their videos, still calling me Grammy without any of the complicated arithmetic the adults were doing. I asked Kevin once, directly, whether something was wrong. He said no. He said it the way people say no when they mean not yet. The Tuesday happened on March 4th. I remember the date because it was my friend Nola's birthday, and I had been planning to call her that afternoon. Brenda came into the kitchen while I was having my coffee. She sat down across from me, sat down, which surprised me. I thought she was just passing through, and she said, "I think we need to talk about a longer term plan for you." She said it gently. I'll give her that. She used a gentle voice, the kind people use when they've practiced what they're going to say. She told me that having me in the house was more difficult than they'd anticipated. She said their routines had been disrupted. She said the boys needed their space back. The guest room shared a wall with the older one's bedroom, and apparently that had become an issue, though this was the first I was hearing of it. She said she thought 2 weeks would give me enough time to find a place. I sat there with my cardinal mug going cool in my hands. I didn't yell. I didn't cry, not in front of her. I said, "Does Kevin know you're saying this?" She said, "We discussed it." I said, "I see." I got up, poured the rest of my coffee down the drain, and went back to the guest room. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. I did the math I didn't want to do. 69 years old, no house, $31,000 in savings, Social Security coming in at $1,340 a month, and 2 weeks to figure out where to sleep. I called Faye that afternoon instead of Nola. She answered on the second ring. When I told her what had happened, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Mom, come here. Just come to Tucson." I told her I would think about it. What I meant was, I am not ready to be someone's problem twice in 1 year. I found a room in a boarding house in Kettering, a suburb south of Dayton. $55 a night, weekly rates available, shared bathroom down the hall. The woman who ran it was named Dolores, and she had a cat named Biscuit, who seemed to disapprove of everyone equally. I paid for 3 weeks and told myself it was temporary. Temporary is a word that can stretch in uncomfortable directions if you let it. I didn't tell many people where I was. I told Faye. I told Nola, who immediately said I should move in with her, and I thanked her and said I was sorting things out. I did not tell Kevin's boys, who texted me occasionally asking when Grammy was coming for dinner. I didn't know how to answer that. I looked at apartments. Dayton's rental market had changed considerably since the last time I'd had reason to pay attention to it. A one-bedroom in a halfway decent building was running $1,100 to $1,400 a month. With my Social Security, that left me roughly nothing for utilities, groceries, or the prescriptions I took for my blood pressure and my thyroid. I had the savings, but $31,000 is not a number that stays large when you're doing that kind of subtraction every month. I started making spreadsheets, old bookkeeper habits, columns and rows, everything in its place, as if organizing the numbers would make them less frightening. Kevin called me once during that first week. He asked how I was doing. I said fine. He said he was sorry things had worked out the way they did. He said it the way people apologize for weather. I said, "I know, Kevin." I didn't say anything else. There wasn't anything else I knew how to say that wouldn't cost both of us, something we couldn't afford. The letter came on a Wednesday, 3 weeks into my stay at Dolores's boarding house. It was addressed to me. Full legal name, forwarded from Kevin's address, which meant it had been sitting in their hallway for some days before Brenda thought to mail it on. The return address was a law firm in Columbus, Whitfield and Associates, attorneys at law. I almost put it aside to deal with later. I had gotten into the habit of putting difficult-looking envelopes aside. I opened it standing at the little table in my room with Biscuit watching me from the doorway. The letter informed me that a Mr. Gold, Leonard Pruitt, formerly of Columbus, Ohio, had passed away in January of that year. It informed me that I was named as a beneficiary in his will. It asked me to contact the office at my earliest convenience to discuss the terms of the bequest. I read it 3 times. Leonard Pruitt. I sat down on the edge of the bed and tried to place the name. It took me longer than I expected, and then it came to me all at once, the way memories do when they've been waiting in a quiet corner. Leonard Pruitt had been my mother's older brother. Her big brother, the one she'd lost touch with sometime in the 1970s over a disagreement I had never fully understood. He'd moved to Columbus. They had exchanged Christmas cards for a few years, and then even that had stopped. My mother passed away in 2019. I had not thought of Uncle Leonard in years. I was not sure I had ever met him more than twice. I called the number on the letterhead the next morning. The attorney who answered was a woman named Ms. Ellison, and she had the practiced, measured voice of someone who delivers complicated news for a living. She confirmed that Leonard Pruitt had died in January, age 88, unmarried, no children. She confirmed that I was named in the will. And then she told me the amount of the bequest. I asked her to repeat it. She repeated it. $240,000. I sat in the plastic chair at the little table in Dolores's boarding house, and I looked at the water stain on the ceiling above me, and I did not say anything for a moment that was probably too long. Ms. Ellison said, "Mrs. Calvert, are you still there?" I said, "Yes, I'm here. I'm sorry. I'm here." There were conditions, she explained. Not complicated ones, but conditions nonetheless. Because the estate was being contested, I would need to establish my identity and my relationship to the deceased through documentation, a birth certificate, my mother's birth certificate if I could locate it, anything that established the family connection. I would need to appear at a probate hearing in Columbus, and I would need to do this within 60 days of the letter's date, which meant I had roughly 5 weeks remaining. The estate was being contested. I asked by whom. Ms. Ellison was professionally careful. She said there was another individual who had come forward claiming a closer relationship to the deceased. She said she was not at liberty to say more at this stage. I said I understood, and I thanked her, and I sat with that information for the rest of the day. I knew my mother had been Leonard's only surviving sibling. My mother had told me that much. What I didn't know, what I would spend the next week learning, was that sometime in the years after the falling out, a woman had entered Leonard's life. Not a wife, not legally, but someone who had apparently been present in his home for the last decade, who had helped manage his affairs as his health declined, and who now believed that presence entitled her to something. Her name, I later learned, was Charlene. I called Faye that night and told her everything. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mom, you need a lawyer." I told her I had been a bookkeeper, not an attorney, and I did not currently know any attorneys. Faye said, "I will find you one." She called me back within 2 hours with the name of a man in Columbus, a probate attorney named Mr. Osei, who had been recommended by someone in her office who dealt with a similar situation the previous year. I called him the next morning. His assistant scheduled me for a Thursday appointment. I drove to Columbus on a gray February day with a folder of documents I'd pulled from the fireproof box I'd kept in my closet even after everything else was sold or packed or left behind. Frank had always insisted on the fireproof box. He was a practical man. I used to tease him about it. I was grateful for it now. I had my birth certificate. I had my mother's, which I'd kept since her death. I had an old photograph, the only one I could find, of my mother and Leonard as young adults, standing in front of a house I didn't recognize, squinting into the summer sun. Mr. Osei was methodical and thorough, which I appreciated. He explained how the probate process worked. He explained what Charlene's claim was likely based on and why it faced significant legal obstacles. He explained what I would need to demonstrate and how we would demonstrate it. He also, at the end of our first meeting, said something I have thought about many times since. He said, "Mrs. Calvert, the documentation you have is strong, but I want to prepare you for the fact that the process can feel personal, even when it's purely legal. Don't let it become personal." I told him I would try. I was not entirely successful. The first time I saw Charlene was at the probate hearing. She was perhaps 60, well dressed, with the particular posture of someone who had decided in advance that she was right. She sat across the room with her own attorney, and she did not look at me for most of the morning. When she did, briefly, the look was assessing, not angry, just calculating. Her attorney presented her case, which rested largely on a document, a handwritten letter, allegedly written by Leonard, expressing a wish that Charlene be provided for after his death. The letter was undated. It was not witnessed. It did not meet the legal requirements of a codicil to the will. My attorney noted these facts. He noted them calmly and precisely. Charlene's attorney argued that it represented Leonard's expressed intention. My attorney asked whether there was any corroborating documentation. There was not. The letter was, upon closer examination, found to have been written in ink that postdated Leonard's death by a period of weeks. This emerged in the second hearing after a handwriting and document examiner had been brought in. I did not know this part was coming. Mr. Osei had arranged for it quietly, had arranged for many things quietly, and had simply told me to trust the process and attend the hearings and answer questions honestly. I had answered questions honestly. That part was not difficult. When the document examiner's findings were presented, Charlene's attorney asked for a recess. During the recess, Charlene walked past me in the hallway. She did not stop. I did not reach out to stop her. There was nothing I needed to say to her that the court had not already said more clearly. I went to the water fountain. I got a small cup of water. I sat in the hall on a wooden bench, and I looked at the high windows, and I thought about my mother, about the Christmas cards, about the photograph of her and Leonard squinting into the sun. I wondered what they had argued about back in the 1970s that had been enough to lose 50 years. I wondered if my mother would be surprised to know that her brother had remembered her, that he had remembered her daughter. I wondered if she already knew, somehow, in whatever way people know things when they are no longer here to know them in the ordinary sense. The hearing concluded in my favor 3 weeks later. The handwritten letter was not admitted as evidence. Charlene's claim was dismissed. The estate, which amounted to $240,000 after legal fees and a modest outstanding debt Leonard had carried, was released to me. I sat in Mr. Osei's office while he explained the disbursement timeline. I had driven myself to Columbus that morning. I'd stopped at a gas station and bought a large coffee and a package of peanut butter crackers because I hadn't eaten before I left, and I hadn't wanted to be late. I was wearing the gray blazer I'd bought for Frank's funeral because it was the most professional thing I still owned. I had a pin in my pocket from Dolores's boarding house, a promotional pin with the name of an insurance company on it. This is what I looked like on the day things changed. A woman in a funeral blazer with a gas station coffee and a free pin. Mr. Oshie shook my hand when I left. He said I had been an excellent client. I thanked him. I thanked his assistant. I walked out to the parking lot, stood next to my car in the pale winter light, and I let myself cry for a few minutes. Not from sadness, or not only from sadness, from something more complicated, relief and grief and the particular vertigo of a life that had gone somewhere you did not plan for and arrived somewhere you did not expect. I moved out of Dolores's boarding house on a Saturday at the end of March. Dolores helped me carry my boxes to the car. Biscuit sat in the window and watched in a manner that suggested mild indifference, which I had come to find strangely comforting. I rented an apartment in Centerville, a town just south of Dayton, a one-bedroom on the second floor with a window that faced east and caught the morning light in a way that made the whole room feel different at 7 a.m. than it did at noon. I bought a small table and 2 chairs and a bed frame, all secondhand, because old habits don't release you just because your circumstances have. I put the cardinal mug in the cabinet above the coffee maker, I called Kevin to give him my new address as a practical matter. He seemed surprised that I'd sorted things so quickly. He asked how I'd managed it. I told him something had come through for me. He said that was good to hear, in a voice that held a complicated mixture of relief and something that might have been guilt, though I was not interested in diagnosing it precisely. I did not tell him about the inheritance then. I told him about it later, calmly, the way you report a fact. He said he was glad for me. I believe he meant it. What I did tell Kevin at the end of that call was this: I want you to know I'm not angry with you, but I also want you to know that what happened in March changed something, and I'm still figuring out what that means. I think you should know both of those things. He was quiet for a moment. He said, "Okay, Mom, I understand." I don't know if he did. I don't know if I did entirely. But I said it, and it was true, and that felt like the right place to leave it. Faye flew out from Tucson in April to see the apartment. She brought her youngest daughter, my granddaughter Lily, who is 8 and has opinions about everything, which I adore. Lily approved of the east-facing window and declared that the cardinal mug was really pretty Grammy, and spent most of Saturday helping me decide where to hang things on the walls. That evening, after Lily was asleep on the pull-out sofa, Faye and I sat at the small table with cups of tea, and I told her the whole story. She already knew the outline, but not the details. Not Charlene, not the handwriting examiner, not the hallway outside the hearing room, not the gas station crackers. She listened to all of it. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mom, I wish you'd told me sooner." "I would have come," I said. "I know. I didn't want you to come." She looked at me. I said I needed to know I could handle it. Not that I could handle it if you were there. I needed to know I could do it myself. She nodded slowly. She is a lot like me, Faye. Practical underneath everything. I watched her process this in real time and recognize it as something she herself might have needed. After a while, she said, "Did you figure it out? That you could handle it?" I told her I was still working on that part, but that I thought the answer was probably yes. I am 70 years old now. I have lived in this apartment for 14 months. I have, in that time, done some things that were practical and some that were not. On the practical side, I put a substantial amount of the inheritance into a mix of savings and conservative investments, which my financial advisor, a woman I found through my credit union, sensible and plain speaking, helped me structure. I am not wealthy, but I am stable in a way that I was not before. In a way that does not require me to calculate whether I can afford both the copay and the groceries in the same week. On the less practical side, I enrolled in a memoir writing class at the Dayton Metro Library. Not because I think I have a book in me, but because I realized, sitting in that boarding house room, that I had spent the last 41 years narrating my life around someone else's story, and I wanted to practice narrating my own. The class meets every other Tuesday. There are 7 of us. One woman is 81. One man is 34. We read each other's pages, and we are honest and we are kind, and I have learned more about writing in 6 months than I expected to, and I have learned more about the other 6 people in that room than I expected to, which may have been the point all along. I also, finally, called Nola and told her everything. Nola has been my friend since 1993. She cried at the Brenda part. She said several things about Brenda that I will not repeat here, but that I appreciated enormously. And then she said, "I'm glad you're okay. I'm really glad you're okay." I told her I was better than okay, which was mostly true, and true enough for a Tuesday afternoon in April. There is a question I've been asked. When I've told parts of this story to the women in my writing class, or to Nola, or to Faye, do I forgive Kevin? I think about this question carefully because I don't want to answer it in the easy way. The easy answer is yes, of course. He's my son and I love him. That's true. The harder answer is that forgiveness and trust are not the same thing, and that I have one of those and am still rebuilding the other, and that I think it's honest to say so. Kevin calls me now on Sunday afternoons, not just when something needs doing. He drove over in November and spent a Saturday afternoon helping me hang the last few things on the walls that I'd been meaning to get to. He brought his boys, and the boys moved all the furniture to try to find the optimal viewing angle for the television, which was not necessary but was very fun to witness. Brenda was not with them. That is an ongoing situation that Kevin and I have, by unspoken agreement, mostly not discussed. I think he knows what she did was unkind. I think she may also know. What people do with the things they know is their own work to do. I have a photograph on the mantel of my apartment. There is no fireplace, just a shallow ledge above an old electric insert, but it serves the function. And the photograph is the one from my mother's things, the one of her and Leonard, young adults, squinting into the summer sun in front of a house I still don't recognize. I don't know what they argued about in the 1970s. I have thought about it since, and I have decided that I don't need to. Whatever it was between them. What I know is that Leonard, somewhere in his 80s, in a house in Columbus I also never visited, sat down with an attorney and named his sister's daughter, remembered her, decided she was worth remembering. I keep the photograph where I can see it from the kitchen table. I see it in the mornings when I have my coffee, the cardinal mug in my hand, the east window going gold. My mother is in that photograph. Leonard is in that photograph. They are both young and squinting and slightly impatient looking, the way people look when someone has asked them to hold still for a picture. They look like people in the middle of their lives with no particular idea of what's coming. I know the feeling. I am 70 years old, and I do not know what is coming. But I am in my own apartment at my own table with my coffee going warm in my hands. I have a writing class on Tuesday and a phone call with Faye on Sunday and a granddaughter who thinks my cardinal mug is really pretty. I have been told I am not needed. I have been asked to pack my things. I have sat in a boarding house room doing arithmetic that frightened me, and I have driven to Columbus alone on a gray February morning with crackers in my coat pocket, and I have handled it, not gracefully, not without crying in parking lots, not without fear. But I handled it. I think that counts. I've been sitting with this story for over a year now, turning it over the way you turn a stone you found on a walk, not sure what you're looking for, just knowing there's something worth looking at. What I keep coming back to is this. Nothing that happened to me was random, even when it felt like it was. Brenda sat down across from me with her gentle voice and her 2-week timeline. And in that moment, it felt like the worst thing. It felt like a door closing. But doors closing are also how you find out which ones were never really yours to begin with. I had made myself small in that house. I had tiptoed and measured and tried to take up as little space as possible, as if my presence were something to apologize for. And I think, if I am honest, I had been doing some version of that for a long time, deferring, accommodating, making my needs the last item on the list. Not because anyone forced me to, because I had practiced it so long it felt like virtue. The boarding house room, the plastic chair, the spreadsheets that frightened me, all of that was the direct cost of not having built something that was mine. I don't say that to be hard on myself. I say it because it's true, and because the truth of it is actually useful. When you understand what led somewhere, you can make different choices about where you go next. Leonard's letter didn't save me. I want to be clear about that. The money changed what was possible, but the money didn't change who I was. What changed me was driving to Columbus alone on a gray morning with crackers in my coat pocket and answering questions honestly in a room where someone was trying to take something from me. That changed me. Doing it without anyone there to lean on, that changed me. Charlene forged a document because she believed that proximity deserved reward. She had been present, and so she believed she was owed. But being present and being honest are not the same thing, and in the end, the difference between those two things was measurable, precisely, legally measurable. The court didn't make a moral judgment, it just looked at the evidence. The evidence was enough. I think about my mother and Leonard, the photograph, the decades of silence over something neither of them probably remembered clearly by the end. Whatever it cost them to stay apart, Leonard still found his way back to her through me, through a piece of paper, through a decision made quietly in his 80s. That is not nothing. That is someone choosing at the end of his life to reach toward family rather than away from it. I try to remember that when I think about Kevin. People can choose. Sometimes they choose late. That's still a choice. What I know now, at 70, sitting at my own table with my east facing window and my cardinal mug, is that resilience is not a feeling. It's not confidence or certainty or the absence of fear. It's the decision to drive to Columbus anyway. It's opening the scary envelope. It's telling your son the true thing even when the easier thing is available. It's showing up, alone in a funeral blazer and handling it, not gracefully, not without the parking lot crying, but handling it. I think that's what we owe ourselves at the end of the day. Not a rescue, not a perfect outcome, but the honest effort. The rest tends to follow.